Hello, GOAT format duelists. Today we're talking about the top 8 anti-meta cards in GOAT format. Now, when it comes to increasing your win rate in GOAT format, I'm always of the opinion that it's better to beat the meta than to join it. So I'm going to give you the best 8 cards that players are using right now as counters to that meta. I will also talk a little bit about which decks you can play these cards in, as some of these cards are more generically powerful, whereas others really belong in a specific strategy. Welcome to GOAT Duels. I'm ACP. Now let's get started with our number 8 card. It's Cyber-Stein. Now I like this card a lot for 2 reasons. One, and this is the main use that people know, is that Cyber-Stein really is great against combo decks in GOAT format. And unlike cards like Kuriboh or Jaugen the Spiritualist, Stein is really good against all of the combo decks rather than specific ones. So it's great against Library FTK, Empty Jar, Reasoning Gate, the Spell Economics deck. Whatever combo deck you're up against, chances are you're going to be able to shut it down by getting either Last Warrior from Another Planet to shut down the summons, or Dark Balter to negate a few of their spells. However, the second use for Cyber-Stein, the one that I think is really slept on, is that this card is low-key pretty strong against your average Chaos deck. And the reason why is that the standard Chaos build doesn't really play a lot of defensive cards, no Scapegoat, sometimes no Torrential Tribute, only one Book of Moon. So what you could do is you could just look for an opening with something like Heavy Storm or Royal Decree, and then just summon Cyber-Stein and take the game for yourself. So what I like is that it's great at sort of taking these even game states where maybe you've traded a few cards back and forth, sort of jockeyed for card advantage, and all of a sudden you just get to say, oh, actually, this game is no longer about card advantage. I'm just going to kill you. Sorry. So that's what Stein Monarch decks have kind of been doing for a while. I know they've gone down in popularity a little bit, but I think they're still good. And something else that I want to point out is that the fact that these Chaos decks play 2 Upstart Goblins makes it more likely that you're going to have the life points to pay for your Cyber-Stein, or if Cyber-Stein doesn't end the game in one turn, that you have enough life points left to not die on the next turn. So Stein, like I said, I think it's a card that you can play in Monarchs. You can get it with Last Will. You can combo it with Cold Wave or Royal Decree. Or I think you can play it either main deck or side deck in any deck that plays Mystic Tomato. Sometimes you will just be able to search Stein with Mystic Tomato or search it with Sanguine and just end the game that way. Number 7 on our list, this is a card that's been popular for a while, but I think does need to be highlighted as an anti-meta card, Phoenix Windblast. And this card is really just the ultimate card for Chaos Mirrors. What you need to realize about playing against Chaos is that the graveyard is a huge resource. So dealing with their monster while not putting it in the grave can be really strong, and sometimes even using Phoenix Windblast on their Chaos Sorcerer can be really strong if you can keep the lights and darks out of the grave. So Phoenix Windblast, it has synergy with a lot of other good anti-meta cards like Kycoo. As I said, you have those 2 cards to keep lights and darks out of their grave. Sometimes you do see Chaos decks maining like 1 or 2 Kycoo while also playing 2 to 3 Phoenix Windblast, which I think is a great way to win the mirror. Also great with Trap Dustshoot. So what you can do is you can either Wing Blast them and then flip Dustshoot to shuffle that monster into their deck rather than letting them draw it next turn. Or you can Dustshoot them first, see their whole hand, use Phoenix Windblast to set them back a turn, and then you basically have 2 turns in a row where you're playing with perfect information, which is really valuable. So although it is kind of a standard card choice today, I also think it really is a great anti-meta choice. And speaking of another card that's a bit of a standard choice, but also, in my opinion, really an anti-meta card, number 6 on our list is Tribe-Infecting Virus. And this is a card where, 2 to 3 years ago, didn't see a lot of play, actually, believe it or not. A lot of people were cutting this for more important cards, presumably, but it's made a comeback over the last few years, and the reason is that it happens to be really good against all of the decks that are popular right now. So it's good against Warriors because, well, they play a bunch of Warriors, so pretty easy to get a 2-for-1 there. Good against Chaos because they play a lot of Spellcasters, right? You can kill double Gravekeeper Spy. You can kill a Spy and a Chaos Sorcerer, a Breaker and a Chaos Sorcerer, a Breaker, and a Kycoo, because these Chaos decks do often play Kycoo. So the two most popular decks do kind of stack up a lot of monsters of the same type, which makes it likely that your tribe will be able to get a 2-for-1. And of course, Tribe-Infecting Virus is great against all of the decks that happen to play Scapegoat as well, because you can clear the goats, hopefully set up some sort of game shot, or at least put your opponent far behind. Also worth noting is that Tribe-Infecting Virus happens to be pretty decent against Burn too. And why is that? Well, because most Burn decks are playing Ojama Trio to try to lock out your monster zones. So using Tribe-Infecting Virus to kill all of those Ojamas while, making their Just Desert to deal less damage to you, freeing up those monster zones, etc., happens to be really good. And those Ojama tokens are beasts, and some of the Burn decks, they happen to also play a lot of beasts, whether it's Death Koala or Panda. So it's pretty surprising, actually, how much you could just set up these big plays against Burn decks by going, oh, I'm going to kill my Ojamas and your Panda. Number 5 on our list, this is a pretty well-known anti-meta card, but it's been doing well for a while, and it definitely needs to be talked about. That is Royal Decree. Now, on one hand, I don't think Royal Decree is nearly as good as it used to be, which is why it's only number 5 on the list, but it's still pretty good. And the reason why is, again, you do have some Burn decks that play a lot of traps. Warrior decks also play a lot of traps. Average Warrior deck, we're looking at, maybe 13, 15 traps. That is a lot, and you really can just shut them down completely, just win the game with a Royal Decree alone. And any card that can just win you the game by itself is going to be a really good card in GOAT format. We don't have really any other powerful floodgate like that in the entire format. Now, Royal Decree, it can be good against Chaos. It kind of depends on their build, though. So if they're playing the more trap-heavy build with Solemn Judgments, if they're going up to, say, 10 traps, Royal Decree can be good against them. But if they're playing a lighter trap build without Solemn Judgments that maybe plays 7 or 8 traps, Royal Decree isn't as good, but it still can be okay. So Royal Decree, it can be pretty good against any of the decks with Solemn Judgment in it. Great against Warriors, of course. Great against Burn. And Royal Decree is a card that can be played in a lot of decks. We have seen this played in GOAT Control. We've seen it played in various Chaos decks. We've seen it played in Monarch decks. We've even seen it played in Zombie decks. So that's a lot of options if you're looking to capitalize on Royal Decree in GOAT format. Number 4 on my list, it's a card that's been annoying GOAT format players for quite a while now. It's Dustshoot. Now, this card has really been catching on lately for 2 reasons. One is that it's just really strong against Chaos in general. And the reason why is that, like Phoenix Windblast, it's this card that can deal with a monster while not putting it in their grave. Even just doing something like shuffling back their turn 1 Thunder Dragon can be really strong, because now they're going to have difficulty putting those lights in their grave. They kind of have to wait it out and try to draw it again. Great against Sinister Serpent, obviously. Just send that back, get those Sinister combos out of there. And the other reason that Dustshoot has been catching on a little more lately is the format is just kind of faster than it used to be. This isn't the sort of meta where people just draw and pass several turns in a row and you win while having like 10 cards left in your deck. The decks are just faster, and because of that, the early game matters more, and seeing their hand turn 1, sending back their best monster, sometimes that can be enough to just win you the game if the rest of your hand is decent. So Dustshoot can be pretty much played in any deck. You see it played in Warriors almost all the time. You see it played in Standard Chaos probably more often than not, and yes, it can even be played in GOAT Control too, or something like Monarch. So pretty much any of the top control decks or the top aggro decks, they can all play Dustshoot, and I think it's definitely something that you should consider doing because it does have a lot of value against the current meta. Number 3 on our list, some people might have been expecting me to put this as number 1, but this is probably the quintessential anti-meta card of GOAT format. It's Kycoo the Ghost Destroyer. And this card, it's strong for the obvious reasons, right? It shuts down Chaos. It keeps those light and darks out of their grave. It's just a level 4, 1800 attack, normal summon, so we're looking at solid stats. It does die to Tsukiyomi, but people don't really play a lot of Tsukiyomis anymore. So it is still a really strong card in the current meta. you see Warriors pretty much universally playing 3 copies, sometimes only 2. Chaos decks sometimes also tech 1 or 2 for the mirror. We see GOAT control decks often playing this too, either in the main or at least the side. So Kycoo, I think it's a card that, if you're trying to beat the meta, probably one of the first cards you should think about. You do, to some extent, have to make sure it synergizes with your strategy a little bit. It's probably better if you have other aggressive cards to go with it, but it's still just a really generically good card against the current meta. It's also strong against the Reasoning Gate decks that play Chaos Sorcerer, and I say that because a lot of the Reasoning Gate decks today don't play Chaos Sorcerer. Either they're going for the spell economics loop, or they're just going for the Stein limiter removal combo. But Kycoo still good against that classic Reasoning Gate deck as well. Kycoo, also worth noting, pretty decent against the Earth aggro deck, just because they won't be able to summon Gigantes while it's in play. Also good against zombies. They won't be able to activate Book of Life while it's in play. So Kycoo, very strong against the most popular deck in GOAT format, while also being pretty decent against some of the less popular choices in GOAT format. So I don't think we're going to see Kycoo going away anytime soon, and that's for good reason. Number 2 on my list is Mystic Swordsman level 2. And I think this card can just get tons of value in GOAT format right now. Gravekeeper Spy is super popular, deals with that really well, deals with obviously everything else, Dekochi, Magician of Faith, Magical Merchant, you name it, whatever flips people are playing. You know, if they're setting Spirit Reaper, it's going to deal with that. If they're setting Mystic Tomato, it's going to deal with that. And in a way, it's a lot easier to use than something like Blade Knight. Yes, you can play Blade Knight as like an anti-meta choice too. Blade Knight is sort of, it's good at dealing with flips, but you mainly play it because it has 2,000 attack. Whereas Mystic Swordsman level 2 just kind of says, look, I don't care what monster you're setting. I don't have to make any reads. I don't have to think about if it's Dekochi or Mystic Tomato. Whatever it is, I'm just going to attack it. It's going to die. It makes a lot of your plays a lot easier. And yes, we all know the obvious place where you can play Mystic Swordsman level 2 in Warriors, right? Great there, of course. You play 1, you search it with your Reinforcement of the Army whenever you need it. You get it back with Premature Burial or Call the Haunted if your opponent kills it. However, I think other decks can side this as well. I do like it as a side deck in GOAT control against Chaos. I think a lot of times they're not really going to be expecting that. And if you're playing pre and call yourself, you can again sort of get that value, get multiple uses out of it, and just put your opponent in a lot of awkward spots. I also think you can side it in something like Monarchs. Obviously, you could also play it in Earth aggro, because in Earth aggro, you can search it with Giant Rat or Reinforcement of the Army. So personally, if I'm playing Chaos, and I have played a lot of Chaos, Mystic Swordsman level 2 is one of the most annoying cards to deal with. If anything, I think it's almost harder for some Chaos decks to deal with than Kycoo is. Because Kycoo, at least you can kind of set up a wall with something like Spies, Dekochis, Night Ascent, whatever, prevent that Kycoo from touching your grave. Whereas for Mystic Swordsman level 2, you have to have the defensive trap, right? The Wing Blast, the Raigeki Break, etc. And if you say Raigeki Break it, they can just, bring it back with Call, attack again. So I think Mystic Swordsman level 2 is really slept on card. I think even in Warriors, I would probably just side the second copy. I think in decks like GOAT Control, I would probably side the first copy. And number 1 on our list, this is a card that has seen a little bit of play for a while, but I think is super slept on. I think it's super underexplored. I think it's a lot better than people think it is. And that is Zaborg the Thunder Monarch. And Zaborg, the deck that won Worlds, it was playing Zaborg. We've seen it played in, yes, Chaos Returned. We've seen it played in Monarchs. Those are some of the more obvious choices. I think, however, you can either main or side it in other decks. GOAT Control sometimes plays it. It can be pretty good there. It kind of depends on what tributes you want to play in for what purpose. But the great thing about Zaborg is it does super well against Chaos Sorcerer, and it does super well against Gravekeeper Spy. Those are 2 of the most popular cards in the format, and it happens to be good against, of course, really any other set, like Magician of Faith, Dekochi, what have you. I think that it's a card that can be mained or sided a lot more in GOAT format in decks like GOAT Control. Even Warriors, I think, you could either main 1, because often Warriors, you need that extra light for your BLS, And, Zaborg is really good against Chaos. It's really good at dealing with Gravekeeper Spy, which sometimes Warriors has trouble dealing with. So, I think in Monarchs, you probably play 3. It's just too good. In Monarchs, you have to play 3. It's too good not to play 3. In decks like Goat Control, you probably main or side 1 to 2 copies. I don't really think you can play it in like a standard Chaos build just because you're already playing like 3 Chaos Monsters and a bunch of Thunder Dragons. I think if you play Zaborg, it might be a little too much of a dead draw, but I think you could consider siding 1 for the mirror. But I will say, pretty much any time I've played Zaborg in Goat format, I've gotten tons of value out of it. And the counters to Zaborg are cards like Tsukiyomi, which people aren't playing a lot of. Most control decks just play 1 copy of Tsukiyomi, which, you could probably deal with, right? You'll just save your Mirror Force for their 1 Tsukiyomi. No, they won't have another one. Book of Moon, also not super popular if they're looking for another way to flip it down. Defensive cards, again, also not popular. Like, Zaborg doesn't do that well against, like, Scapegoat, for example, but not a lot of people are playing that. So, yeah, if you wanted to play an anti-meta deck in GOAT format, the way I'd probably start is figuring out, like, how I'm going to play, like, at least 2 or 3 Zaborg, and then kind of building the rest of my deck around that, because I think, overall, it is the best anti-meta card in GOAT format. So, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you think there is a card that I missed. And if you like watching this video, then you might learn something from watching this video here.